Phospholipids make up the basic fabric of the plasma membrane. They consist of a glycerol molecule, 2 fatty acids, and a phosphate group. The 2 fatty acids are nonpolar hydrophobic tails, and the phosphate group is a negatively charged polar and hydrophilic head. Since the tails are hydrophobic, they face the inside, away from the water, and meet in the inner region of the membrane. Since the heads are hydrophilic, they face outward and are attracted to the intracellular and extracellular fluid. If phospholipids are placed in water, they form into micelles, which are lipid molecules that arrange themselves in a spherical form in aqueous solutions. A second major component of plasma membranes are proteins. Integral membrane proteins are integrated into the membrane since they have at least one hydrophobic region that attracts the hydrophobic core of the phospholipid bilayer. Peripheral membrane proteins are found on the outside and inside surfaces of membranes and do not stick to the hydrophobic region of the membrane.
Membrane proteins determine the function of the membrane. These proteins include integral and peripheral proteins. Of the integral, there are carrier proteins and channel proteins responsible for the particle transportation. Glycoproteins, a sugar plus any protein, is used for cell-to-cell identification. The phospholipid molecules in a membrane are not rigid, but move about fluidly. Proteins also move in the membrane to satisfy the needs of the cell. Cholesterol is a fluidity buffer, which resists changes in membrane fluidity, which may be caused by temperature changes. Glycoproteins and glycolipids are located on the outside of the membrane and serve as identifiers. It's selectively permeable by having membrane proteins that allow only certain items to cross the cell membrane.
Nonpolar molecules like carbon dioxide can readily cross cell membranes. Small uncharged polar molecules such as water also can diffuse through membranes, but larger uncharged polar molecules like glucose cannot. Charged molecules like ions, including hydrogen ions, are unable to, though, regardless of size. Transport proteins are able to help molecules that don't freely pass the membrane. Channel proteins are hydrophobic and allow ions or molecules to pass through. Carrier proteins bind to the molecule and change their shape to move the molecule across the membrane. Although some water passes through diffusion and osmosis, most water is able to pass the cell membrane through channel proteins called aquaporins. Aquaporins selectively conduct water molecules in and out of the cell, but they also prevent ions and other solutes from passing. The cell wall's major role is to form a framework for the cell to prevent overexpansion. It controls the direction of cell growth, provides mechanical strength and support, and is porous, which allows some substances to pass while others stay out. Turgor pressure, the force exerted against the cell wall by the cell's contents, push the plasma membrane against the cell wall and thus help a plant to remain rigid.
Cells are constantly in motion because they always have energy. One result of this energy is something called diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of particles of any substance so they spread out into available space. Passive transportation is the diffusion of a substance across a membrane that does not have to expend energy to make it happen. Osmosis and facilitated diffusion are also powered by passive transportation. Active transportation is when the movement of a substance across the cell membrane is against its concentration. Since it's moving against its concentration, it will need energy. Active transportation is powered by ATP energy, so one example of it is when sodium ions bond to the sodium-potassium pump found in the membranes of our cells. To move different and bigger particles, cells must have different and larger carrier protein channels to let them pass.